Hear your story, however long it takes you, whether it's 15 seconds or 15 minutes. Record a short video, and it may very well end up on our show. Derek?
Thanks, Ahmed. Two people in Veracruz, Mexico, are facing terrorism and sabotage charges for allegedly sending out tweets with false information. On August 25th, Gilberto Martinez Vera, a math tutor, and Maria Bravo Pagola, a radio presenter, sent out tweets that gunmen were kidnapping children from a local school. This allegedly led parents to rush out to pick up their kids, reportedly causing 26 car accidents. Emergency phone lines crashed because of the high volume of calls. I want to take a quick look at my screen where we're going to see some of the timeline of tweets from Gilberto. He started out with a tweet that said, "I confirm that in the Jorge Arroyo School of the Carranza neighborhood, 5 children were taken by an armed group. There's total chaos in the area." He also goes on to say that his sister-in-law called him a bit shocked. They just took 5 kids from that school, apparently a school where her own children go to. Now, lawyers for Vera and Pagola insist that their clients were only repeating information they'd already seen online, even though no such kidnappings had in fact taken place in Veracruz that day. Both of these individuals are facing a 30-year jail sentence, possibly making this the most serious charges ever brought against anyone using a Twitter account. Joining us to discuss this via Skype from Mexico City is John Ackerman, a professor of law at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. John, thank you so much for being with us. We understand that there's already was a lot of concern in Veracruz and people were already on edge. Could it be that the government is simply scapegoating these individuals?
I think that would be a correct hypothesis, Derek. Thank you for having me on your very interesting program. It's a privilege to be here. Yes, of course, Mexico in general has been going through a serious problem over the last few years of violence and caused by organized crime, linked many of it to drug trafficking. And Veracruz in particular has been going through very hard times. Recently there was a grenade thrown in a public area near an aquarium. There have been lots of problems in the streets and lots of fear general among the citizens. So they have created a network of communication through Twitter, not only in Veracruz but throughout Mexico, to inform about what's going on. Because the problem here is that the normal media, the newspapers, the television, just does not give complete information about what is happening on the streets, either because the government doesn't want people to know what's actually happening, or because the narco-traffickers or the criminals don't want people to know what is actually happening in the streets. So people have been using, particularly Twitter and Facebook, to get information about the situation in terms of public security. And so what these two Twitters are doing, and they were completely unidentified on their accounts, they weren't using anonymous accounts. They weren't trying to create problems. To the contrary, they had picked up information. So on some accounts it came from the internet itself, but on other accounts I've seen the actual information came through phone calls, through people who had heard about that actually something was happening at these schools. And so they decided to put this information out on the web to inform their followers, their friends, their colleagues that something was happening so that they could take care of their family. And the ridiculous thing about this is that they're being accused not of spreading false information or somehow misinforming the population, but of terrorism and sabotage. That is the really extreme nature of this, which could lead their jail sentence to be not 30 years, but 50 years if they were found guilty of these two charges.
Wow. Mark?
I wanted to actually ask you about the decision of the Mexican authorities to level terrorism charges. You know, we were talking earlier about the legacy of 9/11, and one of the real pernicious legacies is the use of terrorism charges as a way to suppress dissent, as a way to stifle speech. And, you know, this is usually something that's left to more autocratic regimes, but here we have Mexico, and a vibrant, if troubled democracy, is sort of using these sort of same tactics. I'm wondering sort of what you make of that.
Well, yes, this is an indication of the serious problems in Mexico. Over the last few years, with the pretext of this drug war, really very many similar things have been going on here, as in, for instance, the United States in terms of the struggle against terrorism. The military has now had been called out on the streets to fight the drug gangs, and this has created an incredible increase in human rights violations. And it led to, yes, this using of terrorism or organized crime as an excuse for authoritarian-natured government to repress free speech. Now, the state of Veracruz is a specifically interesting state because there has not been a formal democratic transition, for instance. While on the federal level, we now have a different party who is ruling. We have serious democratic problems at the federal level, but at the state level in Veracruz, the same party has been ruling there for over 80 years. And so that's really kind of a backwater when we're talking about democracy. And this is a clear indication of these ludicrous accusations for using the social networks.
We're getting some really interesting feedback on this from our community online. Ahmed?
Yeah, John, I just wanted to say, Fariba_98 is saying, if this is the case, then most governments are guilty of terrorist activities. And, as you said, someone was relating this to other countries. We saw a hashtag use, Saudi terror law, where they were trying to say any criticism or misinformation or rumors would be constituted as terrorism. So, I mean, does this drive the point home, or what do you think is, looking to the future, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, it's really a dangerous case because there's really nothing on these people in terms of they could possibly, for instance, be working for organized crime. Not at all. These are just innocent citizens who were reproducing information that ended up being false. And this is a clear demonstration that the Mexican government is fearful that something might happen in Mexico similar to what's been happening all over the world in terms of Chile, England, Spain, Greece, Egypt, Libya. I think the Mexican authorities, both at local and at the federal level, are concerned about this new communication going on between the citizens.
John, on that front, we got to pause because we're about to continue this conversation online, but I'm going to want to ask you about how citizens are using these tools in more broader ways other than these two. So stay with us for just a sec. Thank you all so much for being with us. Ahmed, great job as well. We're going to continue this conversation at stream.aljazeera.com. There's some really interesting nuances to what exactly is happening in Mexico. Remember, all this week, we're covering the anniversary of 9/11. Use the hashtag AJE911 to send info to the network. As always, tweet us at AJStream. We'll see you online. Hi, welcome to the Post Show. We're going to continue this conversation about what is happening in Mexico. 2 Twitter users are facing, we thought, 30 years each, apparently potentially up to 50 years, on charges of terrorism for sending out tweets that turned out were not factual. Now, let's jump right back in. John, thank you again for being with us. The thing that I want to ask you about is this idea that there are a number of different accounts that are tracking people. I was reading an article earlier today that was talking about accounts like Track MTY from Monterey, at Anna Rent, at CIC MTY. We also did a show a few weeks ago about at balaceraver, where people are basically creating localized accounts where they report about what is happening and reports of violence in ways that the national media is not necessarily covering. What I want to ask you about is we understand some media in Mexico have actually signed pledges not to report on the drug war. So what is behind the vacuum of information in mainstream Mexican media about this?
Well, there's 2 sources for it. One is the fact that the criminals themselves are not particularly are interested in only certain violence being reported on. Particularly that violence, for instance, committed by their adversaries, which would call attention to the police, and that would help them in their competition with their adversaries. But a lot of it also comes from the government itself. The reports that I've seen, NGO reports, show that actually most of the cases of censorship or pressure directly on the media come from the government officials, both military, police, and the executive offices, and not so much directly from the narcos. Because the government is very concerned about the impact that the failure of their fight for peace and security in Mexico has had. The approval ratings for the president, for the governors, have come way down in recent years, and they really want to kind of control the media. And what I was getting to before also is that the fact that in Mexico is a particular case in terms of media. We have a very concentrated market. Most of people get their information through the television, about 95% of the people. And within the television, there are basically 2 companies, one which is called Televisa, which controls about 75% of of the market, and TV Azteca, which controls another 20% of the market. So there really is a sort of monopoly, duopoly control over the major sources of media, and they are pretty much in bed with the public federal authorities. And so really we only find out about what is agreed on between these two sides. And so that's why in a country like Mexico, social networks has become very important and really taken off in the last few years.
I guess